Welcome to the Worry-Free Podcast by Event Resources. I'm Lee Simmons. Capturing the moments at your event is very important. Seeing guests enjoy the event through pictures can be very beneficial in many different ways. So is hiring a photographer essential for your next event? We think so, and that is our topic for today. Joining me for this discussion is Nick Caito, who's a full-time photographer at Trinity College and was a freelancer and owned his own business as a photographer for many different events, has a lot of experience in the events world. Nick, I've heard this many times. People say, do I really need to hire a photographer for the event? Can I just have someone on my staff just take some pictures, or can someone just take cell phone pictures? What would you say to that?
I mean, I might be like a little bit biased in this field, but I'd say yes. If your minimum idea of event coverage for your event that you've already invested all this time, this effort, this money into putting on, if you're figuring that you can just have somebody take photos with a cell phone and that's going to do the trick on press releases, on social media, any kind of follow-up, no, that won't do it. You should probably hire a photographer. We're millennials, we're elder millennials, but we kind of invented the phrase "pics or it didn't happen." So same thing, it keeps going. These days, yeah, pictures from the event or it didn't happen.
And how does sponsorship, marketing, how does that play a factor in a photographer taking the pictures?
Yeah, so with a event photographer, somebody who specifically has experience with events, they've shot things like your event before. So they know that there's a lot of different considerations, that you want to have photos that look good, that capture what happened, and also that your event didn't just pop up out of nowhere, that there was support from sponsors. And a lot of that might involve getting interesting, unique perspectives of sponsorship signs and logos instead of just kind of pointing to the wall and taking a picture of a sign. Okay, that's great, but a sponsor wants to see that their sign and their logo is in front of all these eyeballs in the room and that they're actually going to be getting some kind of return on that investment for your event.
Sounds like it's more than just point and click. There's more to it than the thought behind taking the pictures.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
What can event planners do before the event starts to help prepare the photographer to have what they need to have the best results?
So top of it would be a shot list. A shot list is kind of like a breakdown of exactly what the event planner is looking for. So it's kind of like managing expectations. And in fact, this is something that I'm probably going to talk about a whole bunch in our conversation. It's all expectations and communicating those expectations to the photographer, and the photographer returning with any kind of questions they might have, and also being able to communicate their own expectations and what they can deliver for you.
Can you explain a little more about the shot list?
Yeah, so it could be, we need a photo of the CEO of our company with the governor, or we need our honored speaker with, this person or with that person, or a shot of their table or them with their friends, anything like that. If there's an award ceremony that's happening as part of the event, it could be we need shots of each awardee, we need shots of the awards themselves, we need audience shots, we need those sponsorship images. It's all just setting expectations of exactly what you're looking for.
All right, so the event happens, it's done, I had my event. When can I expect my pictures? How fast did the pictures come back from the photographer to the event planners?
So I would say for the full batch, which could be several hundred images depending on the size of your event, the length of it, you might be looking at like a week, maybe a little bit more, but it's totally reasonable for the event planner or the person who's organizing the event to ask the photographer for a few images like right afterwards. I mean, that night is possible, but the next morning or something like that. And that would be your essential images. So anything that you would want to put on social media that you might want to send to the local newspaper or television, any kind of immediate follow-up. And that's something that should be communicated in advance so that way the photographer can make sure that they block out time to get those photos to you and to meet your needs.
How can the event being organized and the way the room is laid out, how can that play a factor for the photographer? And what can those things done to prepare help make it a better experience for the photographer?
So with that, it's kind of like any steps that you would take to make the event flow better or look better is also going to make a photographer's job easier in terms of that flow of the event or how the photos are going to turn out. So it could be that you want to make sure that you don't have a step and repeat, that's like a photo backdrop, right in a high traffic area where you're going to have a lot of people walking in the middle of the shot. Or you don't necessarily want to have it right next to the entrance to the venue because then you'll get a huge bottleneck. So having an event planner or an event planning organization that can kind of line that stuff up in a thoughtful way is going to definitely help a photographer's work. There's also the actual event space itself. Some rooms look really great when you go there and you're just standing looking around, but the human eye works a lot differently from a camera. So someplace that looks really beautiful in real life might look like a giant black hole in photos. So having any kind of additional lighting, uplighting along the walls, anything like that can definitely help with kind of giving more texture to the background. You also want to think about lighting on stage, on the podium. You want to make sure that you have proper lighting on your speaking subjects, that way you don't get giant bags under everybody's eyes or big shadows from noses.
Yeah, and I can tell you too, it's very often that we have photographers come up to us when we're setting up events and saying, hey, is this how the lighting's going to be? I'm trying to get my shot ready to prepare, and we're like, oh, no, just kidding. This is what it's going to be, so they can prepare for the right flash or whatever it may be.
Yeah, yeah, and that's also something that experienced event photographers will do that somebody without that experience might not. Event photographers that have done this sort of thing before, well, we know what to look for. We know what kind of questions to ask. So going back to that shot list, that helps us prepare for where we need to be physically in the room. It helps us with timing of when we need to be there. And so we might arrive at a venue early and start looking around, kind of blocking out different shots. Having that experience in somebody who focuses on this sort of subject or type of shooting is definitely a lot more helpful than having somebody who takes portraits. Not to knock portrait photographers.
It's different.
But
it's just different.
Yeah, it's totally different.
Yeah. So about cost. No one ever wants to talk about cost. What can an event planner expect in terms of cost, generally speaking, and what goes into figuring out that cost?
So everybody runs their business differently, and so I can't speak for anybody in particular. But I would figure that the cost of an event photographer would probably range from about $150 an hour to it could be $400-600 an hour, depending on that person's experience. And there are a whole lot of different things to keep in mind for that. Whether the photographer is bringing assistants, whether they have a second photographer who's going to be helping them get various shots. All those different things can affect a photographer's cost. And that's also talking an hourly rate. So usually a shorter event will be an hourly, but some people might price their business structure differently. So if it's 4 hours, 5 hours, then maybe it's a half-day rate or a day rate, something like that. All that could be kind of talked about and figured out in advance of the event when you're kind of lining up the expectations and what you're looking at.
And I think it's important to mention, when you talk about cost, there's always going to be someone less expensive. There's always going to be someone more expensive in any line of business, right? And you have to decide what the right fit is for your event. Am I right? I mean, because to your point, experience is going to play a factor into the cost and the quality of what you're getting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you go for a photographer that's less expensive, that might be because they have less experience. And depending on the nature of your event, like if it's a casual cocktail reception that's pretty low impact, then maybe you want to go for a less expensive photographer, where it's not as important to get some like very high quality, high impact images, because maybe this is a photographer you see yourself having a relationship with over the years, and they increase on their talent and their skills, and you want to give them a chance. I know when I was starting off that there were certain clients that took a chance on me, and I'm eternally thankful for that sort of thing. But if you're going for an event that's very high impact, so if you have the governor or a member of Congress, or it's a major award ceremony, then you probably do want to splurge on somebody that you know is going to come in. They're going to ask all the right questions in advance. They're going to know what to expect. They're going to anticipate your needs, and they're going to make your life a lot easier while getting you exactly what you need. So it all does depend on the individual photographer, their experience, and also personality. Like that's something that we can't really understate too. Like a photographer is interacting with everybody in the room, so they need to have a good personality
to represent you in your company or organization.
Yep, and you also want to make sure that they're not necessarily soliciting business nonstop while they're in the room representing your company. So it's all that kind of balance.
Got it. We take a lot of pictures internally for ourselves, placement of things, spacing of things, just so we know for the next event or the next year what worked, what didn't work, what we need to adjust, etc. Can event planners use the photographs from their event when they hire a photographer for internal uses like that for their future planning?
So that's a really good question, and that's usually something that does get worked out in that whole pre-planning phase. So usually when a photographer takes those kind of images, it'll be before an event starts. That way you can get just wide shots of the empty room. So that way you know exactly what this looked like in the room versus looking at a bunch of blueprints where it's a little bit tougher to imagine. And that sort of thing can definitely help with planning for the following year, looking at what worked, what didn't work, what alternate options might be, and just what looked good.
Well, like you said too, though, earlier about bottlenecking. If we put the step and repeat near the entrance, we might have noticed through pictures, oh, there's a big line of people trying to get in. Let's not put it there. Let's move it to the other side or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so there's also another part of that question about who might be able to use those different photos. So that kind of gets into another huge item of pre-planning, contracts. Generally, a contract will lay out all the photographer's rights, all the client's rights, everything that everybody can expect, and where those photos can be used or might need additional permissions or kind of checks and balances for where they're used.
And to relate to, this is a question we get asked a lot just through conversations, who owns those pictures?
Yeah, so generally, and again, this is something that would be laid out in individual contracts based on the event, based on a client. Sometimes there's contracts that are just with a client laying things out in general. Other times there's contracts for individual events. Sometimes photographers are the ones initiating the contract. Sometimes it's the event planner or the client organization that's initiating the contract. But it will lay out generally that photographers own the copyright because photographers produce the image. It's their artistic output, representation, something that they've created. But a lot of times it'll also say that they give a license to the client to use these photos for their event follow-up, for promotion, for general marketing use. There's all different types of things, but it should be laid out in the contract. There's also usually things in there that, like, okay, if the client wants to share, say, sponsor photos with that sponsor, then maybe that's okay. But if the sponsor then wants to turn around and use those photos for something, like to say, hey, look, we sponsored this great nonprofit event, well, that's usually something that should be double-checked with the photographer, and that should be spelled out in the contract. And it could be okay. It could be something where if it's for further marketing or promotions or for commercial use, maybe that might incur an additional fee, but that, again, is all something that would be worked out in the contract in advance.
Makes sense. I know we touched on what I'm about to ask a little bit earlier. There are a lot of different photographers. What questions should the event planners be asking when they're trying to decide like what photographer fits best for that event?
I think first would probably be, have you ever done this before? Getting an idea of that photographer's experience. And this is kind of if you're just sort of cold calling photographers. A lot of times in the event industry, a lot of us know each other. Planners know photographers, photographers know venue owners that know the DJ, that know the caterer. So a lot of times you can get just good recommendations like that. But yeah, I would say, have you shot anything like this before? Getting an idea of that experience, whether this is somebody who can handle one of those higher impact events, or if it is more of like a casual type of event, lower impact. Also, a good idea would be to see some of their work. So getting an idea of not just their resume portfolio of all their top shots, but seeing what they've delivered to past clients front to back, a whole client gallery. So that way you get an idea of, okay, maybe this is a person who's really strong at getting podium photos, but we want more candids of the audience kind of thinking or enjoying things. So maybe that's something that you would express to the photographer in all of the pre-event communication, the shot list and everything, or maybe seeing some of their images might make you, not want to enter into a contract with them.
Got it.
So yeah, it just gives you a good idea of what you're getting.
Nick, thank you for joining me for this discussion about photography at events. And we hope this information was of value to you when you are planning your next event and thinking about, should you have a photographer at your event? Thanks for watching the Worry Free podcast by Event Resources.